Guess what? The word assassin didn't come from a movie. It didn't come from fiction, and it didn't come from modern terrorism. It came from a real group, operating nearly 1,000 years ago, who terrified empires, conquered nothing, and rarely killed more than one person at a time. They didn't fight wars. They ended careers. They ended alliances. Sometimes they ended entire political plans with one blade. Today, we lift the veil and learn about the Hashashin, a group where everything you think you know about them is most likely wrong. This is Guess What?, where the past shows that sometimes blending in is better than standing out. 11th to 13th century AD. The Middle East is politically fractured. Power is split between rival dynasties, regional rulers, and shifting alliances. Religious and political authority are intertwined. When politics is religious, political conflict becomes existential. A rival isn't just a rival. They're a threat to your survival and legitimacy. Inside that environment exists a minority community, the Nizari Ismailis, a branch within Shia Islam. They are outnumbered. They have powerful enemies. They cannot win open-field wars. So they do something that makes total sense strategically and sounds horrifying emotionally. They prioritize survival through asymmetric tactics. They are the Hashashin. Folklore and embellishment go hand in hand, and the Hashashin did not escape this. Legend turned them into hashish-addicted, black-robed, hooded figures, melting into the shadows, brandishing sharp blades. But that is just a myth. The Hashashin, coined the Order of Assassins, according to medieval sources, did not wear a uniform. No black outfits, no matching cloaks, no signature look. That would defeat the entire point. Instead, they dressed exactly like the people around them: merchants, servants, soldiers, pilgrims, scholars. If a mission took place in a city, they dressed like city folk. If it was a court, they dressed like courtiers. If it was a mosque, they dressed like worshippers. Their greatest disguise wasn't clothing. It was normalcy. The Hashashin did not use exotic weapons either. Their signature tool was a simple dagger. Not because it was flashy, but because it was silent, reliable, intimate, and impossible to ignore. They preferred public assassinations, often in mosques, courts, palaces, and public gatherings. Why? Because the goal wasn't escape. It was certainty. A dagger at arm's length leaves no ambiguity. Some also carried short swords, knives concealed in clothing, and occasionally poison, rarely, and not their trademark. They did not rely on bows, siege weapons, or battlefield combat. They weren't soldiers. They were precision instruments. Alarmingly, the Hashashin did not prioritize armor. No chainmail, no shields, no helmets. Because their missions assumed no return. Escape was ideal, but not required. The real defense wasn't physical protection. It was preparation and positioning. If you're standing close enough to your target to strike, you've already won. Or died. And they accepted both outcomes. Recruitment was overseen by leadership. Leaders like Hassan-e-Sabah didn't roam villages grabbing children. Instead, recruitment flowed through da'is, Ismaili missionaries, teachers, and scholars. These were not soldiers. They were educators, philosophers, religious instructors, and community figures. They identified potential, not brute strength. They targeted intelligent youths, curious minds, socially adaptable individuals, people capable of silence and patience. Many recruits came from poor families, marginalized communities, regions under hostile rulers, because ideology offers power when nothing else does. And the Hashashin offered purpose, belonging, education, a role in something larger than survival. Recruits were not told everything up front. Rather, the process was layered. It was not a child soldier system, rather a slow burn indoctrination pipeline. Religious and intellectual education could begin in early adolescence. Promising youths might then enter instruction around 12 to 15 years old. Advanced ideological and operational training occurred later, typically late teens to early adulthood. Assassination missions required full physical maturity, emotional discipline, long-term planning, and adult independence. Only a small fraction were ever selected to become fida'i, the operatives willing to carry out assassinations. Most members were support staff, teachers, messengers, defender of strongholds, intelligence gatherers. The assassins were the tip, not the body. The fida'i were trained to memorize routines, study targets for years, learn languages and customs, practice absolute patience, live double lives without slipping. Some embedded themselves near a target for months to years, waiting, observing, becoming invisible. The most important skill wasn't fighting, it was self-control. Their power came from reputation. Rulers knew the assassin might already be nearby. Killing messengers wouldn't stop it. Walls didn't protect you. Armies didn't matter. Fear did the work before the blade ever moved. The Hashashin were not a nation-state. They were not an assassin cult in the Hollywood sense either. They were a religious political order associated with the Nizari Ismailis, with strongholds in mountainous regions, especially in Persia and parts of Syria. Their most famous early leader was Hassan-i-Sabah, linked with the fortress of Alamut. Their objective wasn't conquest, it was leverage. When you can't defeat an empire in battle, you don't try. You target the few individuals whose removal changes policy, succession, or momentum. That is what the Hashashin became known for: targeted assassination of political and military figures, not mass violence, not random killing, not indiscriminate terror. The scale matters. It's the difference between a strategy and a stereotype. Here's what made the Hashashin so feared. They didn't need armies. They needed access. Assassinations were often carried out in public settings, courts, mosques, heavily guarded spaces, using a blade. Why a blade? Because it's personal, because it's unmistakable, and because it communicates something that poison often doesn't. I reached you. The goal wasn't just to eliminate a target, it was to send a message to every other powerful person watching. And in many cases, targets were warned first, directly or indirectly, to pressure them into changing behavior. Sometimes the act wasn't even the assassination. Sometimes it was the threat. That is psychological warfare at its purest: precision plus visibility. Another oversimplification is that the Hashashin were mindless fanatics who threw their lives away. The reality is more complex. Many missions were extremely risky. Some assassins did not survive. But the key point is this: the tactic worked because it was rare, controlled, and strategic, not chaotic. A group that mindlessly burns through its members collapses quickly. The Hashashin persisted for generations. That tells you something. They weren't just throwing bodies at a problem. They were using selective violence as political leverage, because in their world, it was one of the only tools available. Understanding that doesn't excuse it, it explains it. Now we deal with the famous claim that the Hashashin were drugged with hashish before missions. This is a myth. There is no reliable contemporary evidence that their operatives were routinely intoxicated with hashish in preparation for assassinations. The story appears largely in hostile or later accounts, and it functions perfectly as propaganda. If your enemies are terrifyingly disciplined, you can either admit they're disciplined or claim they're drugged. It also helped outsiders explain something unsettling: people willing to die for a cause. But you don't need drugs to explain conviction. You need ideology, training, and a political environment where survival feels absolute. Also, from a practical standpoint, a mission requiring stealth, timing, and precision is not helped by intoxication. The hashish assassin story survived because it was sensational and easy to repeat, not because it was verified. So where did the word assassin come from? The exact linguistic path is debated, and many popular origin stories are overconfident, but here is a common theory. The Nizari Ismailis never called themselves Hashashin. That word comes from their enemies, mostly Sunni chroniclers and later crusaders. In medieval Arabic, hashishi didn't just mean someone who used hashish. It was also used as a slur, roughly meaning low-class person, a troublemaker, or someone seen as socially deviant. Many historians believe this may be how the label began, as a hostile nickname rather than a literal description. When crusaders and European writers heard this word, they brought it back with them. And because medieval Europe already believed the Muslim world used drugs, magic, and mind control, the rumor attached itself to the sound of the word. Over time, the name turned into a legend. The legend turned into a word. Arabic, Hashashin. Latin, assassini. French, assassins. English, assassin. When crusaders encountered the Hashashin, they didn't have the context to understand them, so they filled the gaps. That's where you get the storybook versions: secret gardens, manufactured paradise, drugged recruits, and hypnotic obedience. These stories are not supported as historical fact in a reliable way. They're the medieval version of clickbait. But once these tales hit Europe, they had a second life, because they fit perfectly into an outsider narrative. Mysterious East, hidden killers, exotic danger. The Hashashin became less a group and more a concept. Assassination was effective then because power was personal. A modern state has layers: institutions, bureaucracy, and succession mechanisms. In many medieval systems, power concentrated in individuals. Remove a governor, a vizier, a general, and everything downstream changes. Policy shifts, alliances wobble, successors scramble, and local forces lose direction. The Hashashin exploited a world where removing one person could destabilize many others. They didn't attack armies, they attacked keystones. The Hashashin weren't defeated by a rival sect's propaganda. They were crushed by the Mongol Empire. In the mid-13th century AD, Mongol forces destroyed Alamut and other strongholds. Fortresses can withstand sieges. They don't withstand the Mongol war machine forever. The order's political power collapsed, but the legend survived. In the modern world, people love to borrow the image of the Hashashin: games, movies, internet mythology, political rhetoric. But most of those references strip away the most important context. This wasn't mindless chaos. It was strategy under pressure. When that nuance disappears, the story becomes a prop, a symbol of mysterious, violent outsiders. And that's how historical misunderstanding becomes modern prejudice. The Hashashin didn't need to be exaggerated to be fascinating. They were already fascinating. The exaggeration says more about the storytellers than the subject. The Hashashin didn't invent assassination, but they perfected it as a strategy of survival and deterrence. Their real legacy is not a secret garden. It's a warning about systems built on single points of failure. If removing one person can shake an entire political structure, then the structure was fragile. And fragility invites tactics like this. That's today's episode of Guess What? If you enjoyed walking carefully through history with me, hit subscribe, because next time, who knows what we'll uncover. Until then, stay curious and be suspicious of stories that sound too cinematic to be true.